and the future of our young people. My name is Stuart Love. I'm Westminster City Council's Chief Executive, and Serena, I'm very grateful to you, Michaela, and everybody else involved in arranging this for inviting me along to say just a few words this morning. As we know, there's been a huge amount of press recently around the take-up of vaccinations across London, and also the really important questions have around the safety of the vaccines, and the medical information people are asking before coming forward to be vaccinated. So some of that is going to be spoken about this morning. And just to remind those of you who weren't able to see it, that Westminster City Council hosted an online event that was open to everybody 2 weeks ago. It was chaired by Lord Simon Woolley, and it was a very helpful conversation with people from across London and a panel of experts around the vaccine, and not just the medical implications of the vaccine, but also the reasons as to why there may be hesitancy in some of our communities in London. And then also, really importantly, this morning, we're going to hear from young people about their experiences of the pandemic, but also, really importantly, what the future may hold. And we will hear about some of the projects that are going on across London councils to support young people in what are incredibly challenging times. And if I can just be parochial for a minute, we as Westminster City Council spent Friday evening with the cabinet, the council's cabinet, and we will shortly hear from the leader of Westminster City Council and the executive leadership team, looking at the really important issue of youth unemployment and the shocking and really quite astounding statistics around the levels of youth unemployment that there are, not just in London, but across the whole country. And again, really importantly, the responsibility we all have as local authorities in taking steps to address that and to help our young people into employment and give people hope for the future. So I'm just, lastly, just to say, I'm really very happy. Serena told me there were 230 people registered for the event this morning, which is just, again, really fantastic. And thank you to all of you for taking the time this morning to come and again participate in what is a hugely important set of issues facing all of us in London at the moment. And with that, I'm going to hand over to the leader of Westminster City Council, Councillor Rachel Robertson.
Thank you, Stuart. And it's a great honour to be asked to join this session again. I know this is the fourth in the series of sessions. They've proved hugely successful in terms of exploring really important issues and issues of particular pertinence to the BME group. So we completely support these, and I think they're really important. As Stuart has said, today's session explores two areas which we at Westminster, and I know all London councils, are taking really seriously, both the way that we support and educate and inspire our young people to achieve their maximum potential. And as Stuart has said, there's a real issue at the moment, in particular as we come out of this pandemic, around youth unemployment. So we all need to be looking at how we can explore ways to really address and tackle this really dreadful issue. We must ensure that our young people have the futures they deserve. And second, of course, vaccine hesitancy, which has been a particular issue in the BME group and in communities. And as Stuart said, we held a really, I think, important event a few weeks ago. And it's important that we all make sure that we allow the space to explore the reasons behind the hesitancy and enable people to seek the information and the reassurance that they need to feel confident about this. Anyway, this morning I have been given the great job of introducing the keynote speaker, and I'm delighted to do this because this is someone with huge experience and real knowledge of what it takes to inspire and educate our young people and make them fit to reach their full potential. So Sir William Atkinson, who is joining us today, has over 40 years of experience in education, and he's looked at the weaknesses in the education system and sought ways to improve the way that we educate and inspire our young people. Most significantly, he was head teacher of Phoenix High School in Shepherd's Bush, where he sought ways to address low standards, misbehavior, and inspire the young people there to achieve the maximum that they could achieve. He's a former member of the Department for Education Standards Task Force, the Home Office Justice Task Force, and also the Home Office London Youth Crime Reduction Task Force. So he is very well experienced and knowledgeable in this field. But if I could say perhaps the most important recommendation for me personally was when I spoke to Serena Simons, our own fabulous Serena Simons, before this session in a pre-meet. She said to me, Rachel, I heard Sir William speak several years ago, and he was simply inspirational, and it stayed with me all these years. So for me, that couldn't be a stronger recommendation, and I'm delighted this morning that Sir William has given up his time to address this group, and I'm delighted to introduce him. Thank you. Sir William, you may be on mute.
Thank you, Rachel. I was on mute. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for that ringing endorsement, and thank you also for inviting me to take part of from what I can hear, is a very, very important event which is being supported and organised by London authorities, but principally by Westminster. The issues that I hear you will be dealing with are crucial, not only to the individuals concerned, but to the wider community. So thank you very much for that. As far as my comments are going to be, they're going to be focused mainly on education, schooling, and some of those issues, whilst not for one moment underestimating the significant importance in those issues that I know will be part of this morning's deliberation. There's a sense in which we're told that we're all in this together as far as a pandemic is concerned. The truth of the matter is, of course, we're not. We all are experiencing the pandemic in different ways, significantly influenced by our circumstances that we're in. I recently came across a reference by Sir Angus Deaton, who carried out a review on inequalities. He wrote, whilst the crisis has been referred to in the media as a leveler, the reality is that social inequality has been exacerbated and amplified by the pandemic, and will have long-lasting implications for the most vulnerable in society. He goes on to say, raise further the possibility that inequalities may be a threat to our economic, social, and political system unless they're actively addressed. Now, the pandemic could not have come at a worse time. There's clearly never a good time for a pandemic. But if you look back for the last 10 years or so, and none of the comments I make this morning, brief comments, should be seen as political in any way. It's very important that when we're discussing these issues, we stay above politics and we focus on what people require to live their best lives. Yeah. Nevertheless, the fact that we've gone through a period of austerity clearly has resulted in some changes in the way our capacity to support different members of our community going forward. There have been significant challenges to the finances of local council, which has meant that they've had to cut back in a number of areas of activity or reconfigure their provision. And of course, we've had Brexit, which has brought its own issues. But despite this changed landscape, I believe that local authorities today are probably more important than ever as part of the solution to the very deep challenges that we have within our society. Clearly, there's a need for the local authority to work closely with central government on the kind of joined up, coherent policies that need to be put in place following the pandemic to address the issues that we're also painfully aware of. And these issues are not subjected to short-termism, not quick fixes. These issues can only be properly addressed if the very best people, the very best brains, organization are given the scope to reflect deeply on the situation prior to the pandemic, what has happened during the pandemic, and what we need to do afterwards. And I think the local authorities have a key role to play in that partnership with with the national government. At the same time, local authorities have an important role to play in fashioning bespoke responses to the situation that exists in their own territories, working very closely with the various voices that exist in their communities. Turning briefly now to education. It is the case that the young people in our system have suffered significantly as a result of the pandemic, where we know schools have been closed, children have been denied access to learning. We know that some youngsters have been able to respond very positively to the challenges associated with distance learning. But when we come to look at those youngsters in our system, the most vulnerable young people in our system, who've traditionally found schooling challenging, the fact that they're now not going to school, not getting the support of teachers, means, of course, many of those are working in isolation. Some are fortunate to be able to get support from their parents or other close family members, but for many, they're left on their own. And even if they're provided with some digital communication to allow them to access the learning that's going on, the fact they've not got that support and challenge that they get in the classroom will result in many of those not really getting much out of that experience. So the considerable divide in terms of educational attainment that existed for many years prior to the pandemic, are simply being made worse by the pandemic. Those youngsters, like my own children, for example, who have qualified parents who are able to support them at the time, the energy, the financial resources to support their learning outside of the school, those youngsters are doing much better than those youngsters who come from a very poor environment where the level of parental engagement isn't as high. Maybe it's because many of the parents concerned, when they're working, often in the gig economy, are spending all of their time and energy still going to work and coming back from work, and therefore have not got the spare capacity to do what is necessary to support their young people. The difference in the impact of the pandemic on different sections of our community, not just the poor young people in our community, but the poor and the Black and brown members of the community, those sections are being disproportionately impacted by what is going on. So when we think in the future about what we need to improve the circumstances of our young people, it is essential that we look at approaches which are centered on the individual's concern. When youngsters go back to school, as they will do hopefully very shortly, there will be tremendous pressure on the school to do as much as possible to get those youngsters to catch up lost learning. It means there will be a relentless focus on doing the right thing, good behavior, good attendance, the appropriate attitude in order to maximize the learning. It could, unless we're very careful in that situation, create a climate where those youngsters who come to school with a range of issues may not get the space to get those issues properly addressed. And as a result, could lead to youngsters being removed from the mainstream learning. Youngsters, as we all know, have suffered significantly from mental health issues during the pandemic. Some of these issues have arisen during the pandemic, others that have existed prior to the pandemic. Unfortunately, the support that is necessary for these young people have not always been put in place. And the numbers are growing quite exponentially over the period of the pandemic. In schools, there will be a temptation in certain schools to try and separate those who need extra support from the majority in the classroom. My fear, my concern is those youngsters who are not behaving in the most appropriate way, those youngsters who are exhibiting a range of needs beyond just learning, and there's nothing such as just learning, their needs will be marginalized. And part of that marginalization could lead to young people being excluded from the classroom, excluded from the school. And if that is the case, where those youngsters go, it's vitally important that their needs are clearly identified and there's a bespoke wraparound approach to supporting those young people. Clearly, what we need to do is to put as much support in schools as possible to ensure that the smallest numbers of young people are excluded from learning during this time. Because whatever the position is outside of school in terms of alternative provision, it's not always the five-star experience that is absolutely essential for youngsters displaying a range of needs. We need, therefore, to do everything we can in putting additional support, additional resource into schools to try and keep those schools with their youngsters, with their peers within their neighborhood schools and maintain their attendance at the school. I think when we talk about mental health, we talk about well-being, and we talk about education. If we've not got the well-being, the mental health of the young person properly supported, their ability to attain, do well in school, to do those things that we think is vitally important will be significantly undermined as a result of that omission. Schools do need support. The schools need to work in collaboration with other local organizations in order to try and make sure that wraparound services are in place. I think there will be a significant demand on local authorities to work with their schools to try and ensure that the support that individual needs is provided. If that's not the case, then we run the risk of more young people being disaffected, more young people thinking school, education, learning not for them, and then the possibility of life on the street becomes greater. And that's something we need to avoid because we know the risk for young people who are not in schools, and those risks are considerable and they've not been reduced by the pandemic. So it's essential, in my view, that we support schools, support youngsters to stay in a learning environment and do all we can to dissuade them from choosing alternative routes forward, which could endanger themselves, affect their own safety and the safety of other community members. So that, for me, and I think I've just run out of time there, is some initial thoughts on how we respond to the pandemic, how we cater in a bespoke fashion for the variety of needs that the young people will be presenting going forward. This is a very challenging time for the young people, for the schools, and for the wider community, and by extension, of course, for the councils. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, William, for just kind of bringing your thoughts to life there for us. And I think just some really kind of pertinent points there about, you know, it's not education by itself, it's not learning by itself, and really to try to educate a young person without due regard for their mental health, their well-being, but also that aspect of parental involvement actually is you know, there's no likelihood of success unless we really, you know, kind of consider it in a holistic way, really. So yeah, I think, yeah, really quite pertinent. And actually, one thing that resonated on working as we do in Westminster, and you know, with Oxford Street, and we've just had a presentation on that, and thinking about where many parents might be actually working in the gig economy, and actually how does that enable them to, you know, with many parents now having to homeschool, and maybe lots of us who work in local authorities having the ability to be working from home. So although it's been a challenge, and I know I've got many colleagues who are able to regale stories, but actually, if one had to be out in the gig economy, in quite tenuous employment, then who's at home to support their children? So yeah, just really...
Serena,
yeah.
the homes do vary tremendously. There are places where there is space to sit down and do some work. There are other spaces, many, especially where the most vulnerable youngsters are to be found, where that space does not exist. There is competition for space. There's competition in everywhere. And we have not even begun to touch on the issue to do with food and nutrition, which is so important. One of the things I found when I was teaching is that when the young people came to school, if they'd not had a proper breakfast, then their attention level, their concentration level was significantly impaired. And one of the things that we did, and many other schools around the country, was to create breakfast clubs where youngsters could come, get a decent balanced breakfast, which would then tool them up for the work ahead. Yeah. The other thing that I didn't have time to touch on is that schools, although they're vitally important, youngsters only spend something like 17% of their time in school. So the rest of the time, they're in a home environment. At home, they're sleeping, but sometimes they're on the streets. And sometimes they're taking part in really good, well-organized, safe activities within the Scouts or Guides, etc. Yeah. But sometimes those youngsters are on the street and they're vulnerable to all kinds of influences. Yeah. So you're right. The situation does call for a clear understanding of the kind of ecosystem that surrounds these young people. And it's no good just attacking one or two aspects. One has to do the entire thing, because the family are crucial, work is crucial, housing is crucial, nutrition is crucial, yeah, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a couple questions. I think Zakaria, I think your hand is up. Did you want to just come off mute and ask your question?
Hi, thanks so much for putting this on, and I think it's a meaningful discussion around how we can support young people and the BME community with the vaccination and the pandemic post this era. My sort of comment is around how we sort of support communities that have experienced sort of events like Windrush and gentrification, and the working class who have been neglected prior to the pandemic. How can we, as you know, practitioners and those that can make decisions, implement open dialogue and discussion to make sure that those communities are heard now, and that things like the vaccination are not sort of earmarked as, oh, it's another thing by the government that leads us to not be empowered to take it, which will put communities at greater risk. I know we've talked about the digital divide at the minute, and ultimately it's those that are of poorer socio-economic backgrounds who are being widely affected, and these impacts are going to be longer term if a young person isn't able to get the education that they need. I just wanted to sort of hear from speak about what his experience is and how we can sort of really acknowledge that point and how we can support.
Thank you very much for that, Zaka. What I would say to that is that it is really important that individuals as well as groups of people and organizations like the local council really have a properly joined up view about what they need to do. The activities of individuals is always important and always to be encouraged. But it's when we have a joined up response at different levels within the community, it is at that point we can have make a difference. A classroom teacher is able to make a difference with 30 kids. A school head teacher is able to work and make a difference with 1,000. And I think what we have to do is have joined up action with the significant others, having a clear focus of all the elements that need to be in place if we're really going to support our communities in a way that they need to be supported. Individual action, great, but it's joined up collective action that's important. And we do that by making sure that when we talk to our community, when we talk to members in their neighborhoods, it's a genuine dialogue. It's a two-way dialogue where we're saying stuff, but we're also listening to what's coming back to us. And I think if we can have sustained, joined up dialogue of substance, that then gives us the opportunity to begin to understand what we need to do in our local communities to try and lift up as many people as possible. Bit woolly, but never mind, that's me.
No, that was fine. Just a few questions I can see in the chat there. So from Fazana, what is the most powerful thing as local authorities that we can do to try and help the most marginalized children not to get left behind? And I suppose the extension that he's speaking about, it needs to be a joined up approach.
It clearly, we know where our vulnerable children are situated in our communities. We know where they live, we know the schools they go to, and we know the challenges they face. So with all of that knowledge, it is possible then for us to devise policies, initiatives that address those specific issues. So it is within our gift, it is within our level of competence and understanding to be able to focus down on those individuals, those communities, and give the support and sometimes a challenge they need to help them lift themselves up and out of the dire situation that they find themselves in. So all of this stuff is doable. We just need the will. And I think the response that we've had to the pandemic has shown what can be achieved if there's a will and a resource, yeah? So there's tremendous focus, tremendous energy about defeating this virus, yeah? It's the same sort of intensity, energy, and focus we need to lift up these vulnerable people who are suffering disproportionately in our communities.
Yeah,
Preachy, but never mind.
Absolutely. No, we get it. Loy, I think I can see your hand is, your hand is up. Do you want to come in, Loy?
Yes, thank you, Serena, and thank you, Sir William, for your very insightful presentation. As you could tell by my accent, I grew up in New York City, and what they've done over there is they've had a drive for residents to donate their computer equipment to people who what we call underprivileged in New York City students. And I know several family members of mine have donated computers that they have laying around that are no longer needed. A lot of companies have refurbished computers and gotten them out to students who need them. And I think that especially in Westminster, where you do have this chasm between, or dichotomy between the haves and the have-nots, I imagine a drive like that would be quite successful in helping to furnish students who need computer software to follow an online education, and as well as contacting service providers and seeing what we can do about getting the free Wi-Fi out to these hotspots as well. They can do a hotspot and get free Wi-Fi, so at least just during school hours, so that no one is left behind. Because as I mentioned in the chat bar, the digital divide has, and actually, as you've mentioned, Sir William, the digital divide has been exacerbated by this pandemic, and but it need not be. There are solutions out there.
Thank you very much for that. I think all those initiatives that you've outlined are really credible and they're to be encouraged. But on top of that, we need to ask a question: why is it that certain people or certain groups cannot afford to purchase and have their own equipment at home? Yeah, and that goes to goes to the issue about low-paid work, which goes beyond Westminster Council and is now at a national level. Yeah, so we have to think about all those key workers that have kept our lives going. They tend to be poorly remunerated posts, yeah? And those people are the ones whose children are struggling with food, nutrition, as well as physical poverty, yeah? And I think we need to do all those good things you've suggested, but we need a bigger conversation in our country, in our society, about the way we want to live and what we want to do for the most vulnerable, the most needy in our community. And that big conversation needs to be initiated at every level, at grassroots level, at regional level, and at national level. We have to take a long, hard look at ourselves. What do we want to look like as a society in 10 years from now? And I'm not being dreamy and just, being unrealistic. I think we just need that opportunity to look very hard at ourselves and to see what we want to be. When I used to run schools, one of the things I was very keen to do was to have an honest appraisal of the state of the organization. What worked, what didn't work, what needed to improve, and what sort of timeline we needed to put in post to bring about the necessary changes. And I think we need that similar approach to dealing with the big issues that have been exacerbated by the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you very much. So William, just want to bring in now one of our dear colleagues, Lord Simon Woolley, who's just on the line and just really wanted to come in on the back of the conversation around education, but also around young people. And we've seen in the news recently about the levels of high unemployment amongst young people. Simon, are you there?
Yes, I am. Yes,
Brilliant.
and what a wonderful masterclass from one of my heroes, Sir William.
Oh my God.
who has been at the forefront of change, particularly around education. But I guess above all, for the years that I've been working in this area, Sir William's been, to people like me and others, a role model who was able to speak truth to power, and at a time that it was very difficult. And I'm glad that we brought you back into the limelight and you can inspire a new generation. I heard the passion and rallying call that did two things, really. One was lay bare the challenge in so many critical areas. And as you say, at this critical time, non-partisan, just as it is, you did that. But I think the other thing that you gave to this group, and I want to take my hat off to Serena here, because every few months she brings 150 people together who want to be given the information, want to be inspired. And that's what you did. That essential piece is about saying to this cohort, it's your role too to make a difference. Here's the challenge, here's what needs to be done, and that we all have a role to play. So thank you, Sir William. I mean, when Serena told me that you were going to give a talk, I thought, well, I better shift my diary. I better just sit down and listen like everybody else. So thank you, sir. And, it is pertinent because on so many levels, I've been in the House of Lords now just over a year, and yesterday or the day before I joined my first select committee, and I chose this committee particularly for the reasons that you outline. It's the Select Committee on Youth Unemployment. Okay. And it was told to us, and I think many of us already know this, there are 4.5 million people on furlough right now. And when furlough ends, many of those will lose their jobs. And many of those disproportionately will be Black, Asian and minority ethnic. And that's already after a position in this last year where redundancies has fallen harder on our communities. Because, as you say, many in our communities have been on low pay, 0-hour contracts, last in and first to go. And so all of this then spirals to a crisis within our community. If you can't pay the rent, the anxiety, the worry that causes, how can you pay the sufficient attention to your child's homework that desperately needs that backup whilst they've not been getting the direct education for nearly a year now? And so this committee and my work that I think intersects with your rallying call, know the facts, know the challenges, and demand a game plan, demand a comprehensive response, not just from central government. And I'd like all the listeners and viewers to know that the Commission for Racial Disparities is about to give its findings soon. Write to them, tell them what we demand, what you demand. But as Sir William said, don't ignore local authorities. They are on the front line. I was in a meeting with Croydon yesterday. Croydon are going through some turbulence. And you know what it's like, Sir William, when you have a school and then you have a budget that has to be cut. And you're thinking, how do I cut this budget? I'm already threadbare. And if I take any money out, it means less services to the people that most need it. So it's important that we recognize the role of local authorities, that we make those demands about essential services. And I've been having conversations with a number of local authorities and saying to them, look, if you can't get all the money you need from government, you need to go to the local businesses. The local businesses that are ensconced in the community, they have to pay their way too. We've got to think smart. We've got to think big picture. Join the dots to ensure the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And I just want to end, Serena, that thank you again. You know, the last time we were together, we were talking about vaccine, and I saw it on the news, on Panorama. Our message is cascading, informing, inspiring, pulling people together. And I hope in this the next hour or so that you've got with this meeting, that you take on board Sir William's words and advice that seeks to bring us together, stronger, united, clear about the challenge. But you know what we've been saying, Serena, and I'm sure I've heard Sir William say this many, 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 many times, and I hope I don't embarrass him too much. But when he's talking to you, he's talking to you as a generation now of leaders. Not tomorrow, not the next week, not next year. Leaders right now. And we've been saying, and we'll say it until we can't speak anymore, own that space. Own that leadership space. Come out of the shadows. Because as he and Serena and Stuart Love and Rachel, the Westminster leader, have said, there's never been a more prescient time for that leadership to come to the fore. Thank you for allowing me a few words. It's wonderful to share a platform with my hero, Sir William. I'm going to be bragging about it on social media now.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your inspiration and for your considerable leadership over a period of time. Thank you.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you,
Serena.
Thank you both very much. And I think, William, you couldn't have said it any better. I think, you know, here we are with two definitely of my heroes and inspirational leaders within the Black community who I know over the years and still continue to kind of lead by example and inspire many. So thank you both for your words and thank you very much. I can see there's a few more questions in the chat, but just for from needing to kind of move the business along, I'm going to move on to introduce our next speaker, and I have the real great privilege to welcome Sarah Newman, who is our bi-borough Executive Director for Children and Family Services, so for Westminster and also for Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. Sarah, are you there?
Hi, Serena. Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I can't believe, Serena, that you've given me this tough spot to follow when you know I'm being challenged to step up as a leader right now, and you know, being the Director for Children's Services. I should say it feels like a huge responsibility. I think Amanda Gorman in her speech at Joe Biden's inauguration said, history's got its eyes on us. And I really feel that history has got its eyes on us right now. And actually, children are our future. So we really do need to get this right. I read a book the other week, Health is at Home, Hospitals Are for Repairs, by Nigel Crisp. And his first story is about it taking a whole village to bring up a child. But actually right now, children don't have a whole village, they have their home. And, you know, all of the usual places that children and young people go aren't open right now. They're limited by the number of people who they can see and interact with. And, you know, the time that's been spent away from schools and their friends has been enormous, you know, so the impact that this is having emotionally, socially, as well as on their learning is absolutely significant. There was a recent survey done in West London that highlighted of the children who participated, 83% felt that COVID was impacting on their emotional well-being and mental health. And another survey that was published yesterday captured the views of more than 5,000 young people living in London and Essex, whereby 41% of them said they didn't know how well they were performing educationally, and another 54% said they were really struggling to understand new concepts. We absolutely know that the impact on children has been different depending on where they live and depending on their ethnicity. And many of their fears, their anxieties will have been shaped by their gender, geography, race, religion, age, ability, culture, and of course their ethnicity. And we need to acknowledge this. But you know, right now, it's so important that our children are given a voice so as to shape the support that they must be entitled to catch up or recover from this pandemic experience. And to do this, we absolutely have to address inequality. I'm going to just say a little bit about what we've been doing across the bi-borough. So during the first lockdown, children started to write into us with their stories and sending us pictures and poems. And we started to realise the value in this, in understanding their experiences. So we started to work with our schools and our voluntary sector organisations in order to capture the experiences of our children during lockdown. And I should say the picture that's just been put up has been drawn by Samira, who is 14. A wonderful picture, but says 1,000 words, you know. And we're going to exhibit the experiences of children. We're going to do a tour of their pictures and their stories and songs and music. And it's going to go round our library service in July. And it's going to finish at the Saatchi Gallery. We're also about to run a series of podcasts, and they're being developed with young people. It's called Sounds of Our City, and we're trying to talk with young people about the things that matter to them right now, about lockdown, about their well-being, about Black Lives Matters, about the employment and training pathways. We have run local schemes to ensure that all of our disadvantaged children have digital devices and access to the internet. And by the end of next week, we will have distributed, together with the DFE, an excess of 5,000 devices in Westminster and enough money to secure 3,500 devices in Kensington and Chelsea. And we have set up a scheme so that people can donate their computers and we can get them refurbished and distributed to schools so that all children who need a device can have one. Following what Sir William was saying, I'm really pleased to say we absolutely recognise the role that our schools have played, a central role in supporting families during the lockdowns, and their relationship with parents and carers as well as the young people has really strengthened. And what this said to me is that actually we've got to work together as a whole system. There are absolutely opportunities for us as the local authority to wrap support around schools so that they can wrap support around the young people and their parents and carers. And you know, what I think we really saw is that schools in our deprived communities really knew their families, really understood what they needed, and then us wrapping support around the schools meant that actually we could ensure that the schools had the right resources to be able to support those families. And particularly where families where their first language wasn't English, that seemed really, really important. You know, following the Grenfell Tower tragedy in Kensington and Chelsea, we learned a lot about recovery and developed a recovery curriculum with our schools that enabled them not just to focus on learning, but that emotional and social well-being piece as well. And we put in place that recovery curriculum for when children went back to school in September. But of course, as we moved into this further lockdown, we've amended that in order to provide support and guidance to parents around their child's emotional well-being and to give them some ideas about how they can support with that. You know, in Westminster and Kensington and Chelsea, we use a systemic practice model in our social care service. And this has been so helpful to us at this time, enabling our social care staff to talk openly with families about identity, culture, and power and privilege so as to be able to provide the right support. I could go on, but I'm conscious of time, and certainly the podcast information we can distribute separately. But you know, the thing I've really heard is it's absolutely important that we work as a system and that we use the levers that we have and that we can to make sure that children have access to every opportunity right now in order to maximise their potential. So I'll stop there. I think I'm passing over to Farzana Ahmed, who I hope is with us.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Serena and Michaela, for inviting me today to talk about some of the work that we've been doing at Redbridge Council as part of the UNICEF programme. I've been coming to these sessions from the beginning, and I can't tell you how heartening I found it to see the work you're coordinating across boroughs and the impact that we hope to see from that. So I've got a slide deck here. What I won't do is go through all of it. I've asked Michaela to share with attendees, so you can take that away and have a look at some of the good examples in there. What I'd like to focus in on is particularly the impact during COVID and the difference that's made to the programme and the impact in terms of marginalised voices. So the actual programme itself, we approached it in a very different way. So most of the boroughs that are on the programme have joined it because either they've got a problem with their social services, or they've got a problem with schools, or there's a specific aspect that they want to address. With us, it was a slightly different approach. We've got outstanding schools in the borough, something like 96% outstanding schools. We've got an outstanding children's social care. But actually, the question we were asking ourselves was more around our identity. We've always been known as a borough that people wanted to raise their children in, people came here for the schools. But actually, is that the case for everyone? We know there's always people that get left behind. So although we come from a place of strength and real good practice, we know that we can't be complacent about that. Next slide, please. And the next one. So this is a real partnership program for us in terms of who's part of the program. It's not just a local authority program at all. So there's some examples there of who's involved, but that's not everyone. And actually, what we were talking about earlier around partnership and the local authority reaching out and working with others, that's been the real strength of this program in terms of the different perspectives, but also trying to find ways to share our resource. Next slide. So where are we? So just to give you a kind of almost a very, very whistle-stop tour background of the program. In terms of the 4 phases, the first one, discovery, we took over a year to really what the requirement is of us is to really get an understanding of what life is like for young people in the borough. So when I say what life is like, not just what life is like for the people at the youth council and the people that do really well and that are recognised, but actually those people that perhaps we don't always get to hear those voices. So what is life like? What is good for them and what is it that they would want to change? From that 6 months of work, we then spend 2 to 3 months action planning. So we bring the practitioners and young people around the table and we say, what are the actions going forward that will make a real difference in those areas that you identified as being problematic? And then we have kind of 2 to 4 years to deliver on those actions. Now, what was interesting for us in discovery, we did almost a year's worth of work in discovery, so really trying to understand who those marginalised voices are, how we reach them, which spaces they want to communicate with us in. And then just as we were ready to go forward with our summary of what we found and go into development, the pandemic hit. And so the question we had to ask ourselves is, going forward with what's happening in the pandemic, are the priorities of young people the same or are they changing? And so we carried on. We didn't actually go into development. We carried on with almost another 9 months of asking that question in various ways, in various settings, and actually really, really struggling through the pandemic to engage with young people because just everything was so different and new for us. So actually now we're just coming to the end of discovery with almost 2 sets of findings, pre-COVID and post-COVID, and really thinking about the differences. And then that gets us thinking, going forward, are the actions that we're going to have to pull together different? And I think from the discussion so far, we're really understanding that we're going to have to do some things differently because the lives of children have been impacted so much. So the next slide. And the next, so that's it. So just to take you through the badges. So what UNICEF asked us to do is look at, of all of what we've learned from young people, is look at the things that came through the strongest. So what are the priority things that they talked about? And what the challenge in doing that is when you look at the badges that they've given us, so the kind of key themes that they want to look at, you've got flourishing there. What does that mean to a young person? What does innovation mean to a young person? Or why would a young person pick on the, something that says child-friendly services or participating? So we really had to work with young people to understand what those concepts mean to them and come to a kind of a consensus about what they mean. We know from what we've kind of spoken about with young people and listened to so far that there's kind of key emerging themes at the moment. And those for us, we think will be safe and secure. So around kind of safety coming and going to and from school, but broader, for instance, our discussions with young women around sexual harassment. The other one that came through strongly was place, so around climate, but again, also around safety and placemaking and the spaces that they inhabit. And the third one, actually, which was lagging behind before COVID, was health. So during COVID, mental health came through as a significant issue that young people were really worried about. So those are likely to be the 3 badges we go with, and we're just coming to that point that we're gonna confirm that with UNICEF and make that announcement. And the next slide, please. So this is interesting. Who has a voice? So this is an exercise we carried out right at the beginning of our work, and this is again something we keep coming back to because especially with COVID, how has this changed? So the exercise we did, we did a number of workshop sessions with practitioners and with young people, and we said to them, who do we hear well? Who gets to sit at the table? Who gets to have a voice, for instance, through our various youth mechanisms, and who doesn't? And what was interesting about this exercise was actually that it keeps changing. So depending on who you're speaking to, it moves back and forward. And there's some cohorts in there you wouldn't immediately think of. So for instance, homeschool children, children who are carers. And then, for instance, children that are physically located in a way that it's not easy for them to access services. So we don't often think about things like how physically disconnected people are. So, for instance, in terms of access to public transport. But then the other interesting thing was that someone would come and say, actually, young carers have a voice. We support young carers. And someone else would say, no, I'm a young carer. I didn't feel heard, and move it across the other way. So that was a changeable conversation over time. One of the things that we've committed to in the programme, one of the things UNICEF asked us early was, how will you make sure you hear the voice of the seldom heard? And what we said to them is, we're not going to answer that by saying this is how. This is going to be something we ask ourselves through every single exercise we do, through every piece of work we do, and every action we commit to through the life of the programme, recognising that those groups can change. And certainly through COVID, we've understood that actually some of the groups that perhaps might not have done as well before might be not as badly impacted, but others that might have been okay before are struggling much more. And so that's been an interesting a piece of work for us. Next slide. Can we go to the next? Thank you. So this is kind of the little bit that I'd like to focus on, was the work we did through COVID. So we had just recruited our youth. So we had a youth council, we had a SEND youth council, children care youth councils, and various other mechanisms. But UNICEF asked us for this piece of work to specifically recruit young people to form a youth panel. And so we recruited 2 people from every school, secondary school in the borough. So a really, really diverse group from a range of schools across the borough. And what we would normally have done, we had one face-to-face meeting with them, and what we would normally have done is then spend the year developing them, onboarding them. And you see, for those of you that work with young people, you see when they come through to your mechanisms, at the beginning of the process and at the end of the process is the change in those young people. So you really see their growth, their development, their confidence, and kind of how their voice develops over time for them to really become eloquent. We couldn't do that work face-to-face with our young people. And alongside them kind of really floundering in terms of what's happening with schools and trying to navigate life in this new world, it was a really, really difficult piece of work. And us as well, trying to understand, what do we do now? Do we go on Zoom? Do we go on Teams? Do young people know how to navigate these? Do we know how to navigate these? So all these challenges. So it took us a little bit of time to start working with young people through the pandemic. Once we got to grips with them and kind of started having this online dialogue and understanding how that could work, we started to really have those discussions about what they were experiencing. So the survey findings I'm sharing with you there was a COVID survey. Half of the survey was from our local CCG, and so it was a set of questions, and the other half was actually questions that we developed with young people and said, what could we ask? And so they wrote those kind of questions for us. We had the highest response rate, so you can see from there that dark yellow chunk, that was Redbridge's response rate. So people were really interested in what did you do differently. And what we did differently was we asked our youth panel to share that with their peers and to encourage their peers to respond. And so we had that filtering out, not from us, but from young people, because normally what councils like to do is put a link to something online and say, and hope people will come and not really always think about how we can appear in people's spaces and catch their attention. So they did some of that work for us. What was interesting in the findings and what was very powerfully coming across to us was the absolute sheer kind of challenge, the anxiety, the depression, the boredom. There's a small cohort who are doing really well, and when you ask them what they're doing with their times, there's a small cohort that are saying, we're learning new skills, we're learning languages, we're volunteering, and that's like your 10 to 20% of kids that are resilient and doing really well. And then you've got the kind of overwhelming cohort that's saying we're bored, we don't know what's happening, we're anxious, we're depressed. And a lot of them, they're spending the time online, gaming, on social media, and just not knowing how to spend their time. And then there was that kind of last cohort, that kind of 10, 20, 50, about the 20% that were really struggling. We were finding they were saying, we just don't know what to do. We don't know where to turn to. And what we committed to as part of that survey, every single child or young person that said that we're struggling, we went back to them and said, right, here's where you can go for help. Here's some people you can talk to. So and that was quite a big a piece of work. So what was interesting then was off the back of that, we then developed various work streams in terms of going forward. So although we had our business as usual engagement going on in terms of our big piece of work in the borough, we developed some pieces of work. The one that's worth looking at there is the mental health asset map. So this was around the thinking that actually it's not about just waiting for kids to get really unwell and then channeling them into like our CAM support or our really serious mental health referral. What else is there in that mapping? What else is there in terms of provision in the borough that we can steer young people into? So arts, sports, other forms of engagement that can help build their resilience and their well-being before they get to a point that they get so unwell that we have to refer them into services. So further down in this pack, there's details about all of those that we can share. And just to kind of wrap up, if we go to the next challenge, so just the one before on the challenges. So it's been really, really difficult. Young people are really overwhelmed. As my colleague that does this work directly with young people, Raina G, will say, she's never seen young people as anxious and upset and stressed as she's seen now. And so really, really trying to think about how we do this work going forward is going to be a big, big challenge for us. So feel free to share the pack, Michaela. There's lots of examples in there. And I'd say to the people in the group, feel free to contact us. We're really keen to talk to people about what we've learned and what we're doing, but also we really want to hear, especially about how people are doing engagement with children and young people during the pandemic, because we found that really, really hard. So any learning we can get from that in this group would be really valuable. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'll just jump in just before Asim comes. Fazana, absolutely amazing just to kind of see the work that's been kind of taken forward in actually my home borough, Redbridge. So, you know, I'm really happy to see that's what's happening. And I think just so much usefulness there, but really understanding the impacts. And, you know, you spoke about the increased kind of mental ill health and concerns that young people themselves are having around that. But also just seeing the true kind of, that was true collaboration and partnership, wasn't it? We saw the various different organizations that you worked with. So I think there's lots of questions and stuff in the chat, and I'd encourage maybe for Sarah and yourself just to have a look through, and if there's any questions or information that you can provide there, that would be absolutely brilliant.
Happy to.
Asim, are you there?
Yes, Serena, I'm here. Thank you so much. So my name's Asim Chowdhury. I work at Kingston Council, and I'm the chair of the Pan London Children and Young People's Working Group. I'm also the co-chair of the BAME staff network at Kingston Council. It's a pleasure to be here with you today to discuss these important topics. So I just want to talk a little bit about our group, the Children and Young People's Working Group, just to give you a little bit of a flavour of what it is that we do, and also to encourage you to join and to take part in the discussion. And even if you can't join because of your interests, or it's something that you're not kind of working with, what you can do is refer it to colleagues or friends, people that you know work in the industry or sector that may be able to benefit, or those that can benefit the children and young people, because we really need to kind of get as many people at the table, people of influence, people working on the ground level. So what the things that we discuss are things about the deprivation affecting our children and young people from the community, the mental health issues, also things like the access to technology, access to education, the inequalities regarding the meals. Also, an interesting topic that we discussed in our last meeting was something around potential grade discrimination, because there's certain groups that will be going through their GCSEs, A-levels, and they won't be going for their exams. It will be based on teacher assessments. And, you know, there may be biases involved and things like that, and the concern around that. So there are certain topics that are discussed that may not be thought about in the general arena. So please do come join. If you want more information, you can email me, asim.chowdhury kingston.gov.uk, or you can email Michaela, whose details I'm sure you have. And there'll be some details later on as well on how people can join working groups if they want to. But also what I wanted to say as well, this is a mechanism to drive action. So what we do is we discuss issues, raise the awareness amongst ourselves, but also to decision makers. So you heard from Sarah Newman today. We've been speaking with Sarah too. So it's having that link between officers, the community, directors, and then see if we can actually make something happen, drive for action. But also what we want to do is also not have it Westminster centric or Kensington and Chelsea centric. We want to bring in as many London boroughs as possible. So yeah, do spread the word and do join, please do so. And just wanted to also say that it's an amazing opportunity that we have right here, because it's the children, they're our future, and we believe that they're worth fighting for. And at this point in time, we still have the time, resources to make that change. If we put on a united front and come together, we can change things, because we don't want this to be a lost generation. Yeah, so yeah, that's what I just wanted to say about the group and what we're doing, and so please join. So I believe there is a Q&A coming up now, so I'll hand over back to Serena if you want to see if there's any questions and answers for this segment. Thank
Brilliant.
you.
Thank you very much, Asim, my dear friend Asim from Kingston Council, and thank you for all you're doing across Pan London, to chair and to get that children and young people's working group moving. And just to reiterate from Asim, please send these requests throughout your organizations. Don't just feel that if you can't join yourself, let the conversation die there. We've seen that it's collaboration that's really going to enable good outcomes for our children and young people. Send this to your chief executives, your executive leaders. Let them know that this is what's happening across Pan London, and get them to get involved themselves or to encourage others. I think what we're just going to do now, though, Asim, just for time, is we're going to move to to hear from our young people and some of their parents, and then what we'll do is we will do a roundup at the end in terms of questions and answers. Sorry, Michaela. Oh, sorry. I just need to hand over to Aaron McDonald from Young Westminster Foundation, who's going to be moderating.
It's going to be me again.
Sorry, Asim.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah,
you get a bit of a treat. So I'll be moderating the session, and just to go through things. So we're privileged to be joined by some young people in the community, as well as a parent of one of the young people. A lot of these young people have come from the Youth Council, from Westminster Youth Council, and they've been brought here by Shofa Mia, who is the lead with the Youth Council. So yeah, it's great to have everyone here. We'll do some introductions, if that's okay, before we go into a panel discussion with the group. There are a few people that would like to make a statement. So if I could firstly ask for Shivan to join the call, please. And Shivan, if you could just introduce yourself, just say a little bit about your name, age, the borough, and your education, employment status, please. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Shivan Tabas. I'm 15 years old and I'm the Youth MP of Westminster Youth Council.
Thank you, Shivan. Would you like to say anything about about what you've been doing? So just a short statement, please.
So would you like a statement on Youth Council, or are we not getting into panel discussion yet?
Well, we're going to go into the discussion shortly. But if you wanted to
Okay, yeah, sure.
if you had a statement prepared, if
Hi,
you could do so.
Asim. Sorry, Asim, can I just come in? So Chivan's pre-written something he's going to read out, and his mum's next to him right now. So is that okay, Chivan? You can just read out what you've prepared. Thanks.
Okay, sure. Hi, my name's Shivan Turbas. I'm 15 years old. I'm here in Westminster. I feel like COVID has been a really tough time for all of us, as we can all agree. However, I feel like it's been an especially tough time for young people. I feel like one of the biggest challenges has been education and how uncertain it is, with schools randomly being shut for up to 6 months and then reopened again and then shut again, and 2 years missing their GCSEs back to back. And as people have mentioned before, predicted grades being seen as unfair. Another very big issue, I'm 15 years old, so I'm in year 10 now. And I feel like year 10, not knowing if they're going to do their GCSEs or not, has caused a lot of stress between, especially me and my peers. And this, I feel like, has contributed negatively to mental health, as there's been a lot more stress and anxiety. And I feel like because a big source of outreach used to be schools, with schools being shut, there's not enough being done on mental health. And I've worked with great organizations such as HealthWatch trying to do more, but I feel like more needs to be done around mental health, and there needs to be more outreach and recognition. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Shivan. I believe your mother is there with you as well, Melik. Would you like to come in and just introduce yourself and also read out your statements that you may have? Thank you.
Yes, hello. I'm the mother of Jivan Terbas, and I'm here to be the voice of some mothers, and I'd just like to read my statement. And basically, I want to go down the lines of mental health, because children's lives have been turned upside down. Children with the right support and resources, the situation will be manageable, but for others, the effects of this pandemic will cast a long shadow over their lives. The mental health impacts of this pandemic will be felt particularly strongly among children and young people at the time where they are most need support, professional and informal. It is least available. In saying that, Westminster has been incredibly helpful with giving out laptops and Wi-Fi throughout free mobile data, which I have personally benefited from. Mental ill health in childhood and adolescence can last into adulthood, with profound impact on all aspects of their lives. Young people who use mental health services have already unable to access essential mental health support sessions, have been replaced with online or even telephone support, or even postponed. Some young people find this hard and less efficient, or may worry about maintaining privacy if sessions are held remotely with the family members being close by. Children who have already struggled with anxiety, and many who did not previously, are now feeling very anxious about this coronavirus, and they now worry their health and the health of loved ones, particularly those ones who are at high risk. For many young people, the period of school closure may be very hard to cope with, as families are quarantined. Many children will face severe and immediate risk in their own homes. The stress of this pandemic in the home and financial strain on families is likely to aggravate and put strain on the family situations, leading to an increase and occurrence of domestic violence, abuse, and neglect. While the risks that increasing opportunities to report abuse or seek help will be reduced during the pandemic, while schools are important for identifying children who are at risk and providing support, and also being a safe haven for children who are abused at home, those who cannot be accessed for most children in this period. The risk to children's health and well-being, future opportunities are serious and need immediate intervention. Hundreds of thousands of children will face hunger, violence, ill health, and lost opportunities that could follow them into their adulthood. Lastly, while children are remarkably good at adopting, those with the fewest resources always find it hardest to adapt. This crisis is exposing the weakness of the life for so many families. We need an approach to helping young people pick up the pieces, and the key to this is gathering evidence and intelligence needed to understand who is at risk and support them both during this crisis and its aftermath. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing, Malik. All of these points are really, hitting home, and we really need to hear these. I believe we have Helen also here that would like to make a statement. So, Helen, if you could please come in and introduce yourself and read out your statement, please. Thank you. Helen, are you there?
Hello, I'm Helen Yangil. I'm a 14-year-old member of Westminster Youth Council. I'm here today on behalf of youths who've been deeply affected by COVID-19 and its impacts. Depression and anxiety has significantly risen for youth since the birth of the virus. Students have become more and more worried for their future, especially with the pressure that placed on them by adults, reminding them constantly that they need to pass their GCSEs with high grades in order to succeed in life. This leads to them bringing up questions in their head, such as, will I be financially stable enough to provide for my family in the future? One way to help youths is to try and help them to feel comfortable with expressing how they feel, instead of placing them under stress, and maybe allowing them to take breaks from school. And allowing them to take breaks will help them to reduce their stress. In Westminster Youth Council, all the members have different expertise, and we need support from adults and professionals to help us to get to these positions. Last year, Year 11s received their results based on their predicted grades, consequently putting them at a disadvantage because they could have achieved higher results in their exams than what they were predicted. This has also caused students to become more stressed, deteriorating their mental health. Following up from this year, it is also likely that Year 10s who are to do their GCSEs next year will also have their results given by predictions from their previous exams. Being in lockdown has also further declined our education. I know many classmates who want to do well but don't have the right supporting networks. Additionally, 3 in 10 students don't have a device to do online learning from or have to share one within cramped conditions. This will make their mental health even worse, and they'll be even more stressed as they won't be able to catch up when they come back to school. The government could take on more actions to help provide for people and students who don't have access to devices, such as providing more schemes and helping those who don't have help by allowing them to go into school, and this would help them benefit. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Helen. That's the end of our statements, and I just wanted to say and echo what Okay, so coming back, these are stars of the future. So we're going to start off with this discussion with a few questions, and you're going to get to hear from a few other people from the Youth Council. Firstly, I'm just going to do quick introductions, and then we'll start off with some questions for the panel. Jamil, if you could please just come in and just do a short introduction, please.
Hi everyone, my name is Jamil. Hope you can see me well. I'm Jamil. I'm a recent university graduate. I'm 21 years old. I've been working with the Young Westminster Foundation for 3 years now, and it's been such an engaging, motivating experience to be able to make a direct change, help make a direct change to a cause I believe in a lot. Growing up in in a low-end household in Westminster, in the Church Street ward, which is the most deprived ward in all of Westminster, and seeing the change that can come with an organized body such as the Young Westminster Foundation and other bodies is really inspiring. So that's who I am.
Thank you, Jamil.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome. Keshav, please.
Hi everyone, my name is Keshav. I'm also 21. I study medicine at the University of St. George's. During the last year, I've been helping a mental health charity, Brent Young People Thrive, and supporting my local youth council. So I'd just like to echo the views of some people from there and also echo my own views. We're really grateful to have this platform to share our views, and I look forward to hearing views from other young people and trying to develop this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Tala?
Hi, I'm Tala, and I've been at Westminster Youth Council for nearly over a year. And I think it's been really nice to listen about mental health, because I think it's something really important, because it's kind of neglected in school, because they tend to preach about getting offline and doing other activities and going outside, but then they set so much work. So I think it's definitely something that needs to be tackled, because I know a lot of people are struggling during these times, just even with family going through COVID, and on top of that having schoolwork and all these pressures with GCSEs and A-levels. So I think it's really nice to have this open discussion.
Brilliant, thank you. Loshini?
Hi everyone, I hope you can see me. My name is Lashini and I am the MYP, the Member of Youth Parliament for Brent. Along with Keshav, I work at Brent Young People Thrive, and we've been doing a lot of work around supporting young people with their mental health over the last year. I also work with a youth organisation called People Power, who focus on education. So it's really allowed me to kind of see the breadth of where young people can be helped and where we can support them, and really gather their opinions and views over these really troubling times. Again, thank you for giving us this platform to speak on, and it's really great that we can have an open discussion. And I think one thing I'd like to begin with is just perhaps dispelling the misconceptions about young people. And, you know, I think having a platform like this, I just want to say, we do know that we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I think we know that everyone is going through this, but we do feel like we are an almost forgotten generation, and we are left out of the conversation a lot of the time. So yeah.
Thank you very much. Welcome. Ava, please.
Hi, my name's Ava. I'm 15 years old and I work with WYF. I got recruited as a peer researcher a few months ago, and I'm also in the Youth Council and work with Health Watch. Since using these platforms, it's been really helpful to learn and grow, almost understanding mental health better. And I just want to echo what Chivan said in terms of the importance of mental health for young people during this pandemic. I can say that as someone who's very passionate about education, there have been difficulties and challenges, but also I just want to say that during this pandemic, we have seen some of the beauty of humanity, I'd say, because they've done some amazing things, and some people, despite all the challenges, have really gone and thrived through education. And I'm really grateful to have this platform, not only to share the things that needs to change, but also to talk about the positive aspects of the pandemic, of how young people's resilience has really shined through. So thank you today for this chance to speak.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So if we could start off with the first question. So those on the panel, if you want to answer any of the questions, please raise your hand. So the first question would be, what did you find most difficult about the lockdown? So if anybody wants to come in from the panel and raise your hand and to share your experience, please. Jamil, please come in.
Hi, thank you for asking that question. So what's been the most difficult thing about the pandemic? Well, the thing that's affected me the most, and a lot of young people the most, has to be the lockdown aspect of the pandemic. And being a young person who just recently graduated from university, we were all kind of very excited to go out into the world and experience the world firsthand, you know, the real life world, which we've been preparing for about 13 years. And, you know, this as an introduction, rather than, you know, the excitement and the busyness that you usually would have, we were met with the lockdown, you know, the quiet lockdown indoors. And some moments have been really great. Like Ava said, they've been really beautiful. Spending so much more time with my family, which I hadn't been able to do in the past 3 years. With my younger sibling and my parents was amazing. Getting that quality time together. But of course, the negatives on the flip side as well is only being able to speak to my family. Meet my family in that sense. So there was a certain disconnect because at university or in school or in the workplace, you're very connected with other people. You get to experience other views. Have that human contact, and that was very abruptly stripped from all of us. So an issue of connectivity, I guess, and finding more personal, ways to express yourself with other people. And, there are platforms out there which you can do that. Luckily we now have Zoom, Microsoft Teams. Those things are more prominent now, and we can use them to our advantages. A second thing which has affected the most is probably space, I would say. After graduating from uni, even my younger siblings, we all need our individual space to do our lessons, which hasn't been, which we have to work around, of course. It's a lockdown, it's a pandemic. There's, you can't really complain too much, but that's just the struggles we've been through. And I just have to say, I'm really grateful for, the City of Westminster or the council, or whoever was in charge of providing electronic devices, because all my siblings benefited from that. And without that, I don't think they would have been able to take advantage of their education as much as they did. Now, on that aspect of things, one thing I would like to see an improvement on, probably more generally in schools, in the way that's taught, from my experiences and from what I see from my younger siblings as well. We've got a group of children now who are not in the classroom anymore, and they're getting all their learning from predominantly online. Now that lowers the level of engagement for them, and it makes what they're learning less real, even more less real than how it was in the classroom. What I would love to see more and more is promoting life outside of school, like job opportunities, what their life is actually going to be. Because me being a first generation, being the oldest sibling among my family, for me, like the outside world was very, very ambiguous and vague. It was like, okay, I'm going to do a subject, go to university and get a job. What kind of job would I be? Probably, I don't know, like engineer, lawyer, doctor. Like those are the main options we knew. I would love for it to be promoted more about different job opportunities, the range of job opportunities and the different programs other than university, such as apprenticeships, internships such as that. So that's kind of my feedback on that. Thank you
so much for that. Thank you. We've got Roberta on the line. I believe you wanted to come in. If you would like to come in, Roberta, thank you.
Yeah, hello, good afternoon. My name is Roberta. I'm 17 years old and currently live and study in Westminster. So I think probably the worst thing about the lockdown experience was probably, I think, in a way, the loneliness, I guess. I probably, like many of the young people on this call today, were, abruptly taken out of school because of the pandemic, and there wasn't a sense of closure about school, and my school didn't contact us for around 6 months, and then I was put into sixth form. And I did find it quite difficult starting off. The education, having to do an essay, after a long time, it did hit me quite hardly. But also another thing that really was quite shocking to see was the job market. As was said just before me, when you're sort of younger, you always imagine sort of, getting your education, going into university and getting a job. But I think the days of that in our generation, the days are over. People have, full-on degrees, but they can't find jobs for years afterwards. And I think that's such a big problem. And to see, university jobs such as retail and, such disappear from the job market because of this pandemic, it's been very difficult as a student to see.
It's 2 o'clock, isn't it? Yeah, she was suggested.
Thank you so much.
No, sorry, no, she hasn't. But I'm saying she was asking for 2 o'clock.
Thanks so much.
Can
So
you
we've got another
just
question,
mute, please?
Yeah, if everybody could just mute up, unless you're on the panel, please. We've got another question here. So just moving on to a different topic. Where have you found solace or comfort during the pandemic? So if anybody wants to raise their hand in the panel, and then we can go to you. Ava, please.
Well, I just wanted to say that I found solace and comfort through doing a sleep diary every night. It's been really helpful for me because when I'm anxious or stressed, I go to sleep, but before I do that, I recount my day and I let my thoughts just filter through, and I look at them and assess them in terms of priority and whether or not they were actually of that much significance to me in the first place. Because I do work with mental health charities, I looked through the websites, and Childline and Mind TV were offering some free resources talking about anxiety priority lists to talk about whether or not the problems that you are facing, although they may seem massive in your mind, how massively will they impact your life. I think another thing is, I don't know if people have done this, but the Thrive London film that came out with NHS England a few days ago, I was a part of that, and we talked about how joining youth clubs has been really helpful for comfort during the pandemic, because I just want to echo what Roberta said, there has been a lot of loneliness, and a lot of young people feel very disconnected from not just reality, but from people, because all this virtual conferencing isn't as valuable as face-to-face interaction. So having a chance to at least have some sort of interaction has been really helpful and comforting, especially when you feel very lonely because you're not with your friends and you're not talking to people that you meet on the street, you know, when school do all those events and functions. So that's been really helpful.
Thank you so much for that, Ava. Can we come to Lashini, please? Thank you.
Hi, just sorry, quickly going back to the first question. I'll touch on both questions here, but I don't know if the other young people can relate to me, but I remember in the first lockdown when the government were asking questions from the public and under 18-year-olds couldn't ask a question. There was so much frustration for me around that. So it genuinely felt like I was being silenced. I don't know if anyone else can relate to that, but I was really, really frustrated. I remember like venting to my mum about this. So that was one thing I found really, that was one thing I was really struggling with during the first lockdown, especially being a student and not having my voice heard and being told one thing and another about my education was really, really frustrating. In terms of finding solace, one thing I have to say is with lockdown, young people who could possibly turn to their teachers in school and to their friends in school now have to turn to social media, which is often like one of the only things that we're really exposed to. And I think this can be really, really detrimental to one's mental health, because in a way, social media it's a positive thing, but at the same time, it can be really negative, and you have a lot of disinformation on social media. And it can be something that is really toxic for one's mental health. So I think it's important to look at taking a break from social media. For me, was really helpful. And on that point, when you're at home, the people you're really exposed to are your parents and your family. So one thing I would suggest to the people on this call is perhaps offering training to parents, offering training to young people as well. We often, I know myself, I turn to my friends when I want help with things, or when I just want to talk, when I want some support, especially with the fact that I can't be with them at this current moment. And, you know, we all feel so disconnected. It's really important that I can turn to my friends. And being someone who with Brent Young People Thrive had a bit of mental health training, I thought that was really useful. And that's something, number one, I can help my friends with, I can help my parents with, I can help my family with, but it's something I can turn and look at myself and help myself with. And I think that's a really important thing. So just as a solution to a lot of the stuff we'd spoken about is probably training for the people that you're at home with. So parents, and often parents who are families who are from ethnic minorities don't often understand issues surrounding mental health. I know with my own parents, and it's not their fault. They were just quite disinformed about it. So I think it would be really helpful for them to have some training and for that to be available.
Great points there, Loshini. We are limited on time today. We are running a bit over. So if I could just ask, just for one last point regarding that question about what you found solace and comfort in. If we could go to Tala, please, and then after that we'll wrap up this segment. Tala.
I think for me, I found comfort with my family and friends. But that's just speaking from a personal perspective when there's so many people from underprivileged households where they face financial pressure and their families are under a lot of strain and stress because of unemployment rates, and as well as domestic abuse households. So I think it's a really difficult time for people to find comfort because it really depends on how much you've been affected. We're lucky that a lot of us haven't been as affected as others because of our class and because of our family's income, but a lot of other people that I personally know or just have heard about all over the news have faced huge, immense financial as well as physical struggles. So I think this time it's really hard to find comfort and solace.
Okay, thank you for that, Tala. I can see there is just one last hand up. So Jamil's got his hand up. Jamil, do you want to just come in finally, and then we'll wrap up?
Sorry, wait, I have to take a call quickly. Sorry for that.
No, that's fine. Keshav, finally, do you want to wrap up on something, a positive note, something that you could say in terms of finding comfort and solace? Keshav, please.
I'll try my best. But in terms of solace and comfort, I think just echoing what Loshini said, just taking a break from the screen. I think, like, we're in a meeting with 130 people. I think it's for a young person, it's very difficult. The fact that we'll have classes from, I don't know, 9 o'clock to like 3 o'clock, all completely on the screen. And then after that, obviously we'll have our phones as well. So it's very easy to just sort of get attached to our screens. I think the best way in which if anybody came to me and asked for some advice, I think Zoom fatigue, Microsoft Teams fatigue is actually a thing. And trying to take a break from it, trying to do an activity that sort of just engages you away from the screen. For example, I think my little brother, he really loves his Rubik's Cube, and he started learning it extensively during lockdown. I mean, he's doing it in really weird times now, like 30 seconds, 20 seconds. I'm like, wow. But it's also the idea of like transforming that into a skill. Yeah, roller skating also sounds really interesting as well. So I guess in terms of mental health, it's really important to sort of engage your mind in like different areas as well, not just, I guess, just sort of visioning the screen. And on a positive note, I think one of the things young people should be proud of is the fact that we are really adaptable. I think a lot of people have kind of overlooked the fact that our generation has gone through a point where, this is supposed to be the best time of our lives. It's mentioned earlier as well. And we're not necessarily engaging with that fully, but I think the fact that we've been able to adapt ourselves to like understand that, yes, this is a global pandemic and look for different avenues in like engaging our mind, I think is a testament to the fact that young people should have. And it would be really good if governments and I guess councils also appreciate that. And maybe after lockdown, try to use the lessons learned from lockdown to maybe even improve the education system, as Jamil said earlier. But yes, I think on a positive note, I'd like to just say that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And just wanted to thank all the participants in the panel today. You're all superstars, and I'm sure you're going to do great things in the future. Yeah, thank you so much. And if everyone could please give them a round of applause because they're so brave for me.
Asim, can I just come in and just say thank you to our youth council members, because we actually didn't stop since the first lockdown. We turned into a virtual platform almost immediately, and the young people continue to join every week, and coming on here and speaking on such a large platform. It was very brave of them. So thank you for those of you who came on board. Thank you to Michaela as well.
Thank you all so much. And Shofa there, I think you kind of took it away, but just so amazing to hear truth from all the young people, and Melek, they're representing for the parents. And Asim, thank you so much for chairing an amazing panel. I felt like we could have allowed that to just flowed on for the rest of the event. So thank you all very, very, very much. And there's a lot of love in the chat for all of you. So please do take the time to check that out. Okay, so I'm just gonna move the event forward now. As you know, this was a two-part kind of event, and now you know, really privileged today to be joined by some esteemed colleagues who, you know, between them have years of experience in the race and equality arena, health, and other aspects of academia. And we know that there's been much in the press recently, and Stuart mentioned at the outset about the event that Westminster chaired a couple of weeks ago, that we hosted and Lord Simon Woolley chaired, around vaccination hesitancy. And so we know that there's some data around this, and you know, it's been spoke about particularly as it relates to the BAME community. But what are the reasons for that? And how do we avoid people with legitimate concerns being stigmatized or feeling like they have nowhere to reach out to for credible information? We've heard today from our young people about social media and how sometimes that's not always positive. So, you know, we did, on that event that we hosted a few weeks ago, we did mention an element of mistrust by communities towards those who are leading. And what can we do? And who's implicated in rebuilding that trust? So thank you all to the panelists. I'm just going to introduce you all now, and then we'll get to questions, if that's okay. So firstly, Dr. Tallulah Oni is an urban epidemiologist at the Medical Research Council Epidemiology Unit at the University of Cambridge. And feel free, if you would like, to just turn on your camera or once we get to the panel. And then Dr. Habib Naqvi, MBE, who is a director at of the NHS Race and Health Observatory. Welcome. And we're also joined by Imam Corey Asim, MBE, who is a senior imam of the Makkah Mosque in Leeds, and also the chair of the Mosques and Imams National Advisory Board. And last but of course not least, Jabir Butt, OBE, who's the Chief Executive of the Race Equality Foundation. So thank you all, and welcome along to our virtual Westminster and Pan London Council event. So I wonder if Dr. Habib, if I could start with you. So I know, just looking at the work of the Race and Health Observatory, you speak about deep-seated issues which really lead to differential experiences and health outcomes. Can you just maybe speak into that and how that is having an impact on the take-up of vaccines?
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for inviting me to this important event. And I think we could, we cannot have enough of this dialogue on this particular issue. Well, the first thing to say is that we cannot escape now the very sad fact that over 115,000 people have sadly died from coronavirus since the beginning of the pandemic. But as I always say, what we can do is learn lessons from the previous waves of the pandemic. And one of the lessons that we can certainly take, not just from the previous waves of the pandemic, but more kind of historically, is the lesson of building trust and confidence within our communities, which will not only have a positive impact in terms of interventions such as the vaccine uptake and the vaccine program itself, but will build the cohesive society that we need within our borders and beyond. What we do know in terms of the vaccine uptake is that there is a lower uptake amongst Black and minority ethnic groups. And what we do need to do is urgently explore the practical solutions to help support the NHS and its ongoing response to this challenge. And that's exactly what the NHS Race and Health Observatory is doing in 3 parts, really, if I can just explain. Firstly, to look at the data, the rapid reviews and the research, which is ever evolving, as we know, with regards to the virus and its impact upon Black and minority ethnic communities, but then turning that insight into actionable recommendations for change on the ground. And that's a very clear thing. And what we did last week, for example, was to publish a infographic that explains kind of 7 points that leaders within health and the community should be focusing on, things such as building the trust, using the data, using professionals and community leaders as well as faith leaders to give out accurate information and not be drawn in for people not to be drawn into some of the very unfortunate fake news or disinformation that's being circulated at the moment. So what we do know is that amongst the most at risk from dying from COVID-19 are unfortunately also amongst those that are most vaccine hesitant. And this, of course, does include our Black and minority ethnic communities, as well as our Black and ethnic minority frontline staff within health and care and other parts of kind of the frontline public sector as well.
Thank you very much, Habib there. And I think it would be really good also, and maybe if you could either share a link around that 7-point plan, because there's been a lot of talk, hasn't there? And I think where we are now is about what are the true actions, and as you say, that can take place on the ground. So thank you very much. Jabir, I'm just going to come on to you now, because you have urged caution, haven't you, that because of the to ensure that the data is not being misinterpreted and it doesn't lead to a stigmatizing of communities that I suppose are already facing, kind of many inequalities. And I feel it's vital. Really, sorry. It's vital for communities to be able to have safe spaces to ask questions and to have their concerns taken seriously, without fear of being judged or being ostracized. So, kind of what are your thoughts really about avoiding that stigma or that blame culture?
Thank you, Serena, and thank you for this opportunity, although I'm not sure I can quite compete with the children and young people's panel that preceded us, but hopefully I've got some things that are worth saying. You're right to point out my worries about this whole discussion about vaccine hesitancy. It started off as a discussion about vaccine skepticism, where people were rightly asking the question, is this safe? And is this safe for me in particular? To a point where now we're all jumping on this notion that there's a great deal of vaccine hesitancy there, and in particular that hesitancy is particularly prominent amongst Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. And I'm struggling to find the data that actually supports that conclusion. I think and as I'll say in a couple of minutes, we've perhaps misunderstood or sometimes misrepresented some of the data that has come through. And most importantly, the key data is still missing in terms of who has been vaccinated. So to just go to give a little bit of background, I'm sure many of you on this call will already be aware of the data that's emerged around the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. And unfortunately, it was all predictable. We only need to look at Sir Michael Marmot's report published in February 2020, which clearly demonstrated the rise in health inequalities across the country over the last 10 years, but in particular the impact of racial discrimination and how that was disproportionately impacting Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, whether it was in terms of school attainment, whether it was in terms of health and well-being, whether it was in terms of life expectancy. There was clear evidence that these communities were suffering. And unfortunately, the response to COVID-19 has demonstrated that in spades. The lack of focus on ethnicity in the first wave, but also the lack of focus on other aspects of inequality. We decanted a huge number of older people from hospitals and put them in residential care settings without testing them first as to whether or not they were infected. And what we've seen is an incredible numbers of deaths in residential settings of older people. We've paid very little attention to, for example, to disability, and the Public Health England report late last year, which identified that people with learning disabilities were much more likely to die as a result of COVID-19 infection, and that the rates were even higher for Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, were just part of that continuing failure to recognise how inequality was having a detrimental impact. Most importantly, we failed to respond appropriately, and those failures that are regularly highlighted, whether it was NHS England's reluctance or lateness in coming around to doing risk assessments of their staff, which led to an incredibly high number of frontline practitioners in health and care dying as a result of COVID-19 infections, whether it was the failure to recognise that Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities were more likely to work in those jobs that didn't allow them to work from home, which meant that they continued to use public transport and continue to be at greater risk of being infected, whether it was to do with their not putting in place the things that would let us self-isolate, for example, proper funding to ensure that those people who needed to self-isolate could actually afford to self-isolate. Those things were just not put in place, and unfortunately still not put in place. And then we come to the vaccine rollout. Our organisation, as many others, have been calling for an evidence-based approach to that. And we saw from the decisions in terms of the priorities that the JCVI put forward, that again, we didn't have an inequality lens there. So the decision to focus on over 80s was driven apparently by the greater death rates. But if we look at Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, we had a much higher death rate of people under the age of 60, something like between 26 and 30% of deaths amongst Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities are for under 60s. So if you prioritise over 80s, you're not necessarily then prioritising the people from our communities that were at greatest risk. As importantly, when you look at the data for the over 80s, there are something like 4.6 million people over the age of 80 in this country, yet Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities account for only about 146,000 of them. Less than 3% of the over 80s are from those communities. So you've prioritised the vaccine for that group, but actually there's only a small group of Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities who are going to be vaccinated. As importantly, we've not recorded the data on who has been vaccinated. So the data that's now been published over the last 3 weeks isn't based on who's actually gone through the vaccine. It's a collection of data that brings it up. And anybody who's looked at it will point out that around 1 million people who've been vaccinated, we actually don't know their ethnicity because it's not been recorded. So for those that we do have that evidence for, it doesn't suggest the kind of reluctance that is being quoted in the media. The one community where it is clear that there's something going on that we need to pay attention to is the Black Caribbean community, who appear to be there in lower numbers. But that evidence doesn't seem to be there for other communities. And I worry that our attention to vaccine hesitancy, because it's not being evidence-based, is going to lead to that very thing that you introduced me with, Serena, which is a stigmatization, which suggests that the reason some communities are continuing to die is because they can't be bothered to come forward, rather than recognizing it's decisions that we have made in the way we've rolled out the vaccine that's important. And for London, this is particularly key. We know because there are more London has fewer 80-year-olds than anywhere else in the country. London initially got less of the vaccine than the rest of the country. And unfortunately for Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, more of their 80-year-olds actually live in London. So you've got the situation, the vaccine is going elsewhere, whereas it's not going for those communities. And it's that equality lens that we need to apply in the future to the continuation of the rollout.
Thank you very much, and some truly things there for us to think on. But I think, you know, this point about this kind of continued failure to apply an inequality lens to the decisions that are being made, you know, it again talks into the thing that we are saying time and time again. How are decisions being made? You know, who is around the table, and what data? You know, you spoke about that kind of having the data, and if we don't know who has been vaccinated in terms of ethnicity, then, you know, thinking about vaccine hesitancy, how much credibility, apart from, as you mentioned, in the Black Caribbean community. So thank you very much. Dr. Tallulah Oni, I just want to come over to you because and some of what Jabir was speaking about there, we know that the directors of public health recently have put out a statement saying that racism is a public health issue. And I know you've made some really great points in your work regarding practical solutions to enable better safety. And Jabir spoke about occupation and some of the I suppose some of the missed opportunities that we had, you know, early on in the pandemic, and actually that we still are seeing. And so you looked at the role of occupation as well as what is really needed to, and I think your points were to reimagine society. Do you just want to talk into some of your work there?
Thanks, Serena, and it's been such a pleasure, and I'm really humbled to be here, and I've been passively listening in for the last hour or so, and it really I'm bowled over by the speakers we had before this session. I'm bowled over by our speakers, but particularly by the speakers before this session, because yeah, I think it was just really incredible. So that really humbled me. I think when we start thinking about where to go from here, it's really critical that we think about where we've come from. And I think the previous two speakers have focused, have given really good exposés on the status of things at the start of the pandemic in terms of inequalities. I just want to highlight pre-pandemic, because recognizing that these a lot of these health inequalities persisted and had been amplified systematically before the pandemic. So if we look at some of the key and common things, factors that increase your risk of either getting COVID or of having severe disease or death from severe disease, it's things like obesity, it's things like respiratory disease, it's things like your heart disease, it's things like exposure to air pollution. Across the board, those exposures were not equitably distributed. Right. So we already knew going into the pandemic that we had these severe inequalities, not just with respect to healthcare, and we've seen and we've heard data already on previous, so there was data on the experiences of GP access, say before the pandemic, and how Black and minority ethnic groups are more likely to report negative experiences of accessing healthcare before the pandemic, but not just with respect to healthcare, but the access to healthy environments, whether that be healthy food insecurity. Colleagues of mine at Cambridge have mapped out unhealthy food outlets across the country, and the hotspots of these overlap with areas of deprivation. So we it was really great to hear at the start of the pandemic, for example, a drive to address obesity, but we focus on individual and not on making the healthy choice the easy choice, and recognizing that there is this injustice with respect to access to healthy environments. The same goes for public spaces. really critical both to your physical health, but also mental health and social cohesion. The distribution of that is highly inequitable. Exposure to air pollution. We had a landmark ruling at the end of last year where for the first time air pollution was put on the death certificate of a young girl in South London whose death was due to air pollution. This is London in the 21st century. Air quality, clean air is not equitably distributed. So all these things already impacted the resilience of populations, not to mention what my fellow speakers has talked about earlier in terms of differential exposures and in terms of precarious work and that work dynamic, but also in homes. So overcrowded housing, poor housing conditions. So all of these things, and I mean, I'm an urban epidemiologist and I'm a public health doctor, so I take a look at how can we go upstream, right? So rather than wait for poor health to manifest and look at how we can treat them, we say, how can we understand the exposures upstream that influence the risk of disease, and how can we impact up front? So that's I think important to frame, and I frame it that way because when we think about the future and where we want to go, right? Some of these things seem really big and complex, but at the same time, one of the really remarkable things that's happened in the pandemic is that it's shifted what is considered possible. Right. So the narrative before was like, oh, yeah, these things take time and there is no, as if there wasn't an urgency to address health inequality. But what happened during the pandemic? There were some things we decided that we could no longer ignore and got huge press. We decided we could no longer ignore hungry children in the United Kingdom. We decided that unsafe workspaces were something that to make public. We decided that the overstretched and under-resourced NHS persistently was unacceptable. We decided that we needed to address obesity. So those are things that have been persistently issues that have dogged particularly or overrepresented in the Black and brown communities, but we've ignored collectively until now. We realized there were things that we could adapt to, right? That some people could adapt to. We could travel a bit less. Some people could work from home, but we also realized there were certain things that we could have adapted to if we were more resilient, right? So if we had better digital equity and access to internet, we could have better adapted in education in ways that were more equitable, right? And then lastly, we were reminded of things that we considered actually critical, but are persistently undervalued. So health and care staff, workers in food and transport, the importance of community engagement and outreach. Those are things that during the pandemic, we applaud key workers every week. What do we do after that, right? How do we actually align what we say we value to how to align a society to what we value? And importantly, to pick up on the point that my fellow speaker made, how do we measure the things that we value and not just value the things that we measure? So if we say we're addressing equity, but we're not measuring it, there is just no way we know that we're doing things right. So absolutely critical when we're trying to address this to, yes, consider mistrust, but I think just to finish off, to pick up on a point that was made earlier, that distinction to recognizing that there is mistrust and there's misinformation, right? And actually in our approach to addressing it, we have to recognize that a lot of the mistrust is actually well-founded and is based on historical and contemporary lived experiences that we have to confront if we're actually to get people on side. I think it's really critical to recognize that can't be top-down. We know that top-down communication engagement does not work. We need collaborative and bottom-up. Firstly, we know that approach can't assume a trickle-down equity, right? So it's not a matter of we'll just reach out and somehow it will be equitable. We have to be deliberate in our action. And lastly, I think this is something that I'm really passionate about. It is really critical that we don't take an episodic, siloed approach to caring. I've previously talked about it. We can't treat community outreach like elections, where we'll come to you every 4 years when we need something and then disappear the rest of the time. That is problematic with building trust. And I hold my hand up because about 5 years ago, I wrote just a popular piece on the importance of reaching the public with science outside of moments of crisis. So don't wait for moments of crisis to reach the public with science. I wrote that 5 years ago, and I got confronted by it, and I thought, what have I done before the pandemic, right? Why did I wait for, and so this is, I'm being perfectly honest here, and this has really informed some of my thinking now, and I'd love to continue this conversation because with a group of friends we're thinking about, and colleagues thinking about how we can curate and connect a group of BME health and care professionals who are committed to this sustained engagement, because bridging that and connecting them to the local level, be that the local authority, be that local community organizations, is really critical to start building that trust journey, recognizing that vaccine uptake is just the first part of it. And that if we are to, in 10 years' time, if we're faced with another societal disruption, we're not starting from the point of, oh, how do we build trust and how do we connect? That we actually already have this groundswell of connected, particularly earlier career health and care professionals. So I would definitely love to continue this conversation in that way to understand better what the needs would be and how best people like me could serve that purpose in a sustained and meaningful way. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And literally, you were just talking into so much of the passion that I see, both within some of the work that we're doing in Westminster, but across Pan London. And we have, Tallulah, we have some working groups, which I think particularly will be brilliant to kind of link you all into around health and well-being, but also around this concept of community engagement. And I absolutely loved and I completely endorse the fact that it should be sustained conversations and involvement with our communities. And that's the only way we are going to learn as authorities, as health professionals, what we need to do to deliver better, effective and more inclusive services. So thank you very much. There's a few things we definitely want to just touch on when we all come together to talk, but I just really wanted to go over to Imam Corey now and really, what is the role of faith groups in supporting our communities to make well-informed decisions? And we know you've done some great work in January, I think, with sermons at the mosque and so forth in terms of encouraging your congregation. I just wondered if you wouldn't mind talking into some of that, please.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thanks, Serena, and really grateful to Westminster City Council and other councils for bringing us together. It's been really inspiring morning for me, just listening to young people, having that dialogue and looking at holistically how pandemic has impacted all of us, but in particular young people. So it's been really insightful for me. In terms of the work that we at Mosques and Imams and National Advisory Board have done, obviously, I think there's a lot of talk about vaccine hesitancy. And I guess we need to unpack that when we talk about hesitancy. Is it that people are hesitant to protect their own lives and protect the lives of others? Or is it more that actually they're taking a cautious approach? They are perhaps, they have legitimate questions and concerns, and we need to alleviate those concerns rather than dismiss them. And I think the panelists here have dwelt on that effectively, that how can we have a more meaningful conversation and bring about those structural changes at times that are required within our existing systems. So we've been holding webinars with people, with young people from across communities, and I think some of the issues are intergenerational. So with young people, there seems to be more trust issues, trust-related issues, and they range from structural inequalities or in public institutions, or inequalities in the health sector, from all the way to mistrust of just public institutions, and that could be partly due to lack of meaningful relationship between public institutions and grassroots. And so effectively this a combination of mistrust as well as vulnerability vulnerability can lead to defensiveness. And unpacking that defensiveness is really important for a number of reasons. Firstly, we need to look at why are young people reluctant to take the vaccine, or at least at this stage, why they are expressing that reluctance. And I'm a trustee of Hope Not Hate. We did a survey, and the findings came out this week, and we found actually 72% of BAME Britons over 65, they will definitely take the vaccine. 72% of them. But whereas when you compare that same BAME group, age groups between 25 to 34, the ratio is around 21%. So the mistrust seems to be a bigger issue amongst young people. So we've taken a three-way approach. Firstly, we've been addressing the issues in our Friday sermons. So hundreds of mosques across the country for the last 4 to 5 weeks have been talking about these issues in the Friday sermons, looking at sharing factual information about the vaccine, and also addressing misinformation, because misinformation in this pandemic can obviously cost lives. And it's really important that people make informed choices. And those informed choices can only be obviously can be made if people are aware of the factual information. And the second aspect is that we've been trying to build trust amongst the local governments and the grassroots organizations. Again, the surveys have shown that people are more likely to trust their faith leaders, their GPs, their local pharmacy companies and pharmacists. And so we need to galvanize that element of our civil society and bring about the change that's so much required. So messenger is as important as the message in this pandemic. And finally, I think we need to recognize and resource, so have outreach engagement and improve the accessibility. In order to do that, practically we've offered places of worship, mosques, gurdwaras, temples, churches, synagogues, have opened their doors to allow for vaccination centers to be opened, to empower communities, but also to help people with their concerns. And I think the tide is turning. We've got some way to go, but we've seen some incredible results in the past few weeks. That people are not hesitant to take the vaccine; they're just cautious. And when they say perhaps no, it's not now rather than never. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Corey. I think absolutely really speaking truth into some of the experiences, definitely the conversations I've had with my family and friends and colleagues, is that it's not a definitive no. It's actually, I need to get some more information. Why was the vaccine developed so quickly? Is it going to be effective against further strains? These are legitimate questions, and I think you make really, really good points. And I really liked your point that the messenger at times can be more important than the message. And there is absolute truth in colleagues or there's some credible people in communities, and how as local authorities, how are we working with our GPs, with our faith groups, with community organizations? How are we working effectively to ensure that the factual information gets to our residents, our communities, so that they can make informed decisions? I think just really, really important. So I just want to kind of throw this open now, just throw out a few questions out to the panel. Because Sir William Atkinson in his talk this morning spoke about if there is the will. And 2 weeks ago, we had Professor Kevin Fenton from Public Health England, and he says he thinks it is going to take the will. So I keep hearing this, and it keeps coming up to me, and I say it's going to take courage, and it's going to take investment, and a multiplicity of other things. But why is it, Tallulah? You mentioned that we started looking at obesity. We've really started to tackle with some prompting, childhood. I was going to say child hunger, and various other issues that for years as a society we've been grappling with. But what about the inequalities that stretch across, where we see more Black and Asian and minority ethnic people living in poor housing conditions, perhaps, you know, overcrowded? Why are we not tackling those issues? What say the panel? Is it too hard? Have we put it in the too hard box? You know, what's the issue, do we think? Just open to everyone, yeah.
I can start off by saying I think it's we had in the past, and I think one of the things that the pandemic response has shown is that too hard box does not have rigid walls, and it's very much dependent on who is where the box lives, who is the opener of the box, who's the closer of the box, because it's possible. So then the issue becomes, how do we keep that box away, right? Because now that we know it's possible. And I think one of the key things is around how we, well, firstly, an honest conversation about societal values, right? And I mentioned that before. I think we pay lip service to equity without demanding it as part of our civic action. And that is not just Black people demanding it or minority ethnic groups demanding it, but everybody demanding equity. And I think that because the social norms are driven by society, and we determine what becomes acceptable. So I think there's an honest conversation that needs to happen there, and part of it is reckoning with the past. And I think the second thing is how we measure. We're often driven by short-termism. Right. So when we want to show impact, a lot of the policies and a lot of the actions are just short term, whereas in reality, we have to recognize that interventions can be immediate, can have immediate impact but be short lived, can have immediate impact and be sustained, or can have delayed impact and can be sustained. And I think that's really important, because if we are planning for impact in how do I show benefit or impact in the next 3 years, we're going to keep focusing on the lowest hanging fruit that don't address the more complex issues. So even if we use the example of COVID, right? So an immediate but short-lived thing is face coverings, right? So we know that everyone wearing face coverings has a significant impact on transmission, but the second you stop wearing it, it doesn't have any lasting. But that has an immediate impact, and that is important. An immediate and sustained impact or relatively immediate, is vaccination, right? So we know that, up to 10 days or so after you get vaccination, you have a relatively immediate impact on COVID, which is sustained for some time. The same goes for public health infrastructure. Delayed and sustained impacts are things like addressing housing inequality, addressing access to green space, right? You're not going to be able to show necessarily in the next 6 months how that is addressed health inequality. But those are the actual fundamental drivers of health inequality that we need to tackle in order to have a sustained impact. But we need to upfront recognize that that's not going to happen overnight. And I think that comes to our metrics of success, and the point I made about measuring the things we value and ensuring that we time arcs for understanding impacts that we hold people accountable to is reflective of the timing of the impact. And maybe the last point is on accountability. So this is something I feel strongly about, because when we think about health, we often limit it to health care, right? But we also know, from a public health perspective, we know that over 80% of factors that influence health lie outside of healthcare. So when was the last time anyone thought, I'm going to speak to my urban planner because actually the decision they made there influenced my health? No, you think about the NHS. Obviously, the NHS absolutely critical and does a smashing job at catching the illness. But we need to think about and change our accountability for health beyond healthcare. So I think those things would be critical to shifting our mindset of impossibility towards decisive action.
Yeah.
Can I just add on that, Serena, if I can?
Yes, please.
I think you gave a wonderful response there, but I think we need to be frank as well. Society has been designed perfectly to give us what we've got, and that's some people benefiting and others not. So this isn't just about looking at health inequalities. Why is it that certain people have certain conditions? Why is it that we have more obesity? Why is it that BME people are more likely to be on the front line? We need to look at, we need to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. And that is talking about racism. I'm sorry, but that's kind of, we need to be frank here. And that's historical. But our country, and in fact, our healthcare system should be geared up to tackle those issues, because we've had a long history of migration in this country. We've got large and growing BME communities. We've got robust legal frameworks in the Equality Act and Health Inequalities Duties. And when it comes to health, we've always had a very good level of investment in healthcare research. But the fact is that when we look at all aspects of society and how we live, whether that's health, whether that's wealth, housing, whether that's the way that the police operate, the education system operates, certain people benefit and others do not. And that's not just something that's been around for years or decades, but it's been around for centuries. So we need to have those honest conversations around discrimination, around racism, and around what does privilege mean to some people compared to others. And what COVID-19 has done is shone a light on that level of discrimination, on that level of impact that a pandemic has had to raise those issues for us again. And when people say, yes, we are now woke to these issues, that's fantastic. But if people are still awake to these issues at Christmas, and I'll be celebrating as much as anybody else, what we need is a concerted, focused approach to look at the causes of the causes. And that includes the fundamental aspects around discrimination and racism.
I think brilliant there, Habib, that you came in from that perspective. Absolutely. Because who needs to be around the table? And what are the absolute actions that we need? Because and we saw, didn't we, in the just after the George Floyd murder and the resurgence of Black Lives Matter, we saw a lot of organizations coming out with their statements of support. But what now? And who is implicated in terms of making the decisions around really tearing apart some of the discrimination that communities have felt and the structural inequalities, and what's the next step? What's the next step? And I don't know if Jabir or if you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Serena. I think lots of really important points from the previous speakers as well. I think what we do need to point out, and that's particularly important for the children and young people involved in these discussions, is that it's often presented that this is the way it is, this is the way things are, and you just have to make the best use of it. But actually, it's decisions people have made. That's the reason it's the way it is. So, for example, we know that clean sewers, inside toilets have probably had as much of impact on people's health and well-being as the NHS has had, because those were the things that spread disease. And the fact that we've actually built clean sewers, the fact that we've built inside toilets and so on, has had a real important impact. However, what we've decided to do in the last 40 years is to, rather than recognize that impact it has on people's well-being, is we've changed it completely, so that housing has now become commodified. It's more about the asset that you own that you can then exchange for more money and so on, rather than recognizing that a good home is safe, warm, and allows you to live in a way that actually enhances your well-being. We know, for example, if you end up living in a cold home, it's much more likely to lead to poorer mental health over the long term. And we know good quality housing can actually have a really important benefit. But we've decided not to invest in that. We've decided we're no longer going to see that as a societal necessity. Instead, what we're going to do is leave it to the private sector to meet that need. And yes, this sounds like a political point, because it is. It's those decisions that have been made that have left it to the private sector, who focused on getting the most money for the developments that they do, that have then meant that this type of social housing that's needed to address some of these challenges isn't there. And I fear that until we start addressing those fundamental issues, that we're going to continue to face ourselves with the situation. Even once we come out of COVID-19, we know there's a real issue of people not having enough food to eat, and that is becoming a bigger and bigger issue, not a smaller one. And I fear those are just going to be other pandemics that we will need to address.
Oh, sobering thoughts there, Jabir, but I think completely honest. And it just feels like, and I'm so conscious that we're coming to the end of this session, and it always feels like there's just not enough time. But, you know, one thing definitely that's become very clear to me since, like, well, you know, before the pandemic really, but I suppose it's been intensified, is the need for us to have spaces where we can speak truth. Because, you know, it's to have a discussion about some communities maybe having misgivings or concerns about the vaccination without having a discussion about racism and the part that has to play is almost like trying to stick a plaster over a broken leg. It just won't work. And so we have to kind of make time for those real conversations, but also not just the conversations, but the what next, and to ensure that the people around the table are people who are making decisions that are impacting or amplifying racist kind of decisions, for want of a better word. So, and again, this takes me back to a point that people who would have attended these sessions before would have heard me say. But unless we have diversity sitting around the table making the decisions, we will continue and continue and continue to make the wrong decisions for our communities. And as we come, I've been trying to say this for many months, as we're coming out of, and our hope and our prayers are that we are coming out of this horrific pandemic and seeing all of the horrific impacts on our friends, our families. Our hope is that we will start to see more reflective decision-making tables, that reflect the communities that they serve. And so have the ability to have a kind of deeper level of understanding about some of the systemic issues that are causing the causes. So I thank you all so much for your time. And I can see there's a couple of questions, and I think if you wouldn't mind, if maybe I could just indulge me just to take one question here from my colleague. I know he's been putting questions in the chat and I've been missing him, so forgive me, Patrick, but let me finish with your question. Is, why, if there's so many people who are speaking the truth, forgive me, that's, one of my children, again, unintended consequences. But why, if there's so many people speaking the truth, is there no improvement or no traction on health improvement for minority groups? Still a lack of equity or equality? Is there a deliberate design? Don't know if anybody wants to pick up on that last point.
I guess I can start. That's okay. It's not just about people speaking the truth. It's also people hearing the truth and doing something about it. And what we would want to do, and I saw another question in the box around what is the Race and Health Observatory going to do? Well, we're going to do those three things, which is kind of look at the data and the rapid reviews, but turn that into actionable insight and support the system. When I talk about the system, I'm talking about the health and care system to implement those recommendations. So we will not only be observing, but we will also be speaking and acting as well. And so it's not just, I guess, it's not just about people speaking, but what we really need is people listening as well. And it goes back to your point, Chair, around getting diversity around the table, because what we need are decision makers that can actually focus on the discrimination and focus on the inequalities that we see. And it's no secret that the JCVI committee, for example, of 16 members is made up of 16 men, of which 15 are white. And so we are already, I guess, in a bit of a straitjacket in terms of implementing guidance that will not have a substantial and significantly positive impact upon some of the more diverse but also at risk populations when it comes to something like COVID. So it's about not just speaking, but it's about listening and having those people around the table.
Sorry, just muted myself. Absolutely, and thank you very much, Habib, for coming in there on that point. And you know, sorry, yes, please.
Could I just add? I think all those points are really important. However, I would add that accountability is the real key here. We've seen it on too many occasions. We get some very senior people from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities, yet the change that we would have expected to have happened hasn't happened. And the real issue here is about accountability, both democratic accountability, but also holding those people to their feet to the fire, that if they say they're going to change things when they get into senior positions, we need to ensure that they actually do that, because if without that, we will have this continuation. So accountability for me is a really key part of what happens next.
Brilliant, Jabir. And I think for all in power or decision making places, we must be asking for that same level of accountability. Panel, thank you so much for your time. And I really just want to throw out there that I'm really keen that we are able in some format to kind of continue some of these conversations and to be kept abreast of, you know, the work that you all are involved in. So if you're amenable to that, I would definitely like to be able to facilitate some type of, you know, kind of ongoing conversation. And I'm sure the colleagues who have joined us today would also appreciate that. So, okay, I'm just going to bring the event now to a close. I think I'm literally to time, but it has been absolutely another amazing event hearing particularly around young people, their parents, education, and the impact that this virus has had on their kind of educational aspirations, but also on their mental well-being, and how we can't take one without the other. And I think really given us all some food for thought. And then I think secondarily coming on to look at this notion around the vaccine and uptake, and we can see that there's some gaps in the maybe the media messaging around hesitancy, and really, you know, unless we have rigorous data, and it seems that we don't have that across the whole picture, then really that, you know, what it might be a misinterpretation of people's genuine concerns. And what it's really showed me is that we must enable spaces for our communities to ask questions and to have their concerns, you know, to be able to air them in a way that doesn't mean that they then going to be stigmatized or held accountable for deaths, etc. within communities. So it's been so vitally important. And then finishing up with just the real conversation about the part racism has to play in where we are now as a society, and we cannot have these discussions without keeping it real. So thank you all so much for to the speakers and to the panelists, to the young people who came along. Thank you so much. And to all of you who joined and listened in and asked your questions. Sorry we weren't able to get through all of the questions, but as always, we will get those answered for you, and we will put them up on the Knowledge Hub. So thank you all for your time. Thank you very much. Stay safe.